Okay, good afternoon, everyone, or good evening, wherever you are, or good morning. I'm Raina, compulsive overeater. I am blessed today because I weigh and measure 3 meals a day off the gray sheet. I write them down, I turn them over to my sponsor or another qualified person, and I don't eat no matter what. And today's not one of my better days, but I'll get to that later on. I can start by saying I have always been a compulsive overeater since, any recollection I have. I grew up in New York City in the Bronx, in a tenement. We were kind of, I guess, sort of very upper, low income. I don't know. I can't explain it. But, we lived from week to week. I know that. I remember that. And I remember having a bill at the vegetable store and it depended on whether or not my father did well at work or was managing to make more money at work. My mother didn't work. My mother was part of the dysfunction of my home. She was an active alcoholic and really struggled with her disease. She didn't know she had a disease. She just drank, and it's something that her whole family did. There was quite a bit of alcoholism on her side of the family. Her mother had died of alcoholism. Anyway, the way it manifested in her was that she would drink excessively, and then she would periodically, her body would just break down and she'd get sick and be sent to the hospital. And I remember as a kid, I used to go to the school across the street. Whenever there was an ambulance in front of my house, I just knew that I was going to get called and told that I had to go home because my mother was being taken to the hospital. And it happened on a regular basis. And I was an only kid. So when she was home and when she was well, there was a lot of this sneaking into the kitchen to get her booze in between, whatever, commercials on TV or whatever. And I remember learning at a very early age to sneak into the kitchen and do the same thing, only with food. So food became the drug for me, and it became my solace, rather, very early on. So, and then she would yell at me because I was getting heavy. It manifested itself immediately in weight gain. And I remember getting notes sent home in public school about obesity being a problem, and then I was hauled off to the doctor. And I think I was about 11 years old when I first started diet pills as a remedy to help alleviate the weight. I know that everybody else was probably 11 years old in the 5th or 6th grade, and they were like, 85 pounds. And I remember weighing 190, and they shipped me right off to the doctor, and I got put on these diet pills. And the diet pills, they worked. They made me very, very speedy, and I was very active, and I was running around the neighborhood, and I wasn't eating, and I was skipping meals, and I was eating less than I should, than I was supposed to be eating, and I lost a lot of weight, and I looked great, and I felt okay, except nobody wanted to be my friend anymore because I was getting very edgy with everybody. They manifested themselves in nervousness and in anger and all the other issues that I hadn't even begun to deal with because I was a kid, came up as a result of taking this medicine. But I did enjoy it. I will say that. And in my teen years, as I got older and I wound up being able to get some summer jobs and make some money, I found myself going to doctors where I could get more of these pills. I did enjoy them immensely. And it led to a further addiction with cocaine later on. I liked my speed, and it led to a whole bunch of other things. But that was the beginning of the co-addiction. It was drugs and it was the food. And when the drugs went away, the food increased. And I'd walk around and I never look in the mirror past my neck because I was 240, 260. I think I was 265 in high school when I graduated. And it's frightening when I look back at that picture of that person. It just the pain you could see on my face and the misery. I had this one beige dress that my mother had made for me. And and it was all black under the arms from chafing and from just summer. And I was an artist in high school, and I'd carry a portfolio around with me all the time, and it was black. And I remember sticking it under my arm, and you just sweat because your arms were so big, and the dress underneath would get all black underneath there, and it would like, I'd take it out and I'd try to wash it by hand and take away the stains. And there was that, and there was the bleeding thighs and all the stuff that goes with a high level of obesity. And but yet I couldn't stop. You know, there would always be that Monday morning I'd wake up and I'd say, okay, you're going to stop. You're just going to eat normal today. And that would last about 2 hours. And then I was off to the races. You know, once I saw some sort of a carbohydrate on a food truck or something, it was like all over with. And I studied illustration and fashion design in school. And I have to also say that I was 16 years old and my mother passed from her disease. 50 years old she was. She died of alcoholism. And I swore that I would never drink the way my mother drank. I just knew that I was not going to be an alcoholic. And that was like my mantra in the back of my head. You know, it was okay that I ate myself into a coma. It's okay that I did drugs. All of that was all okay. But I wasn't going to drink. You know, I wasn't going to be my mother. And it took me a long time, but I eventually got there. And I was there, you know, obviously since I was a kid, but it just manifested itself in a different way. But I didn't see it. I in and out of diet clubs, in and out of doctor's offices through my early 20s. I was in advertising in New York City after I graduated college. And I wound up going to the dentist. Another byproduct of excessive amounts of sugar and carbohydrates was that my teeth were rotting out of my mouth and I didn't take care of them. So I needed to go to the dentist, and I met this woman in the dental office who she was one of the head assistants, and I remember seeing her like 6 months before, and she was very big. And then I saw her 6 months later. I hardly recognized her. And she told me where to go. I said to her, what are you doing? I mean, you look amazing. She said, well, you have to be open-minded because we're going to a church and it's going to be in a basement, and just be open-minded and listen to what they have to say. And there I went, 30th Street and Lexington Avenue, basement of a church, Moravian church. And I walked in and there were like 50 people sitting there, all different shapes and sizes. And these two gorgeous young people got up, this young guy, sexy, who turned out later to become my husband. And the woman standing next to him is also in this program, was there then, and they were co-leading this beginner's meeting, and I was just blown away. They talked about steps, they talked about compulsive overeating, they talked about never being able to control their food. They talked about stuff that people just didn't talk about then. You know, you either were on a diet, you know, and controlled your food, or you were a fat pig, you know, and those were kind of like the two. That's all I heard anyway. But then when I walked in this room, all of a sudden I heard this other stuff. I heard about recovery and a disease and being different than everyone else and feeling different and thinking differently. And I heard all that, and I said, man, this is it. This is the place. So I got, and that was 1977. I got very involved in OA. I had success. I worked the steps. I got a sponsor. I did all the things that, you know, that I was supposed to do. I got on a food plan, and I lost the weight, and I looked good, and I met a man in the rooms, not the man I'm married to, another guy, because also at 27, which was what I was at the time, I was actually going through puberty for the first time in my life, because I'd been so overweight my whole life. I had no valid emotional or intimate relationships with anybody. So I had to learn how to do some of that stuff, and I learned it in the rooms. And it wasn't exactly the healthiest thing to do, but it's what I did. And I lived with a guy for a year, and he wound up throwing me out of the apartment. Not throwing me out, but sort of telling me to leave. And the abandonment feelings that came up as a result of that just struck a chord with me, because I was abstinent. And I couldn't put all of that together in my head. I didn't figure it out. And I wound up freaking out completely and leaving the group because I didn't want to see him in the rooms anymore. He was in the rooms, I was in the rooms. It was a bad situation. So I walked away, and of course it didn't take me long, 50 pounds in, 3 months maybe, I don't know. And I struggled and I struggled. And I wound up going back to regular OA, but it just couldn't get it together. That's time, 5 more minutes? Okay, perfect. So I struggled in it, and I finally came back in, I came back and forth, but I got nowhere. And it wasn't until 1985 when the woman that was at my very first meeting called me up and said, I've got a meeting for you, Upper East Side, Manhattan. Keep an open mind. She said it again. And I was miserable and I was fat. I was about 240 pounds. And I said, okay, I'm going. And I wound up going to my first Grey Sheet meeting, 1985. I'm going to fast forward through the Grey Sheet years and say that I was definitely a head case. I was stubborn, resistant, unwilling to be completely honest, unwilling to surrender. I wanted Grey Sheet with exception. I wanted to screw around periodically, and I'd take my will back and then I'd leave the rooms. And it wasn't until, I would say, 1997 when I first really started realizing that the drinking had come, for me, had come to the point where I was almost getting as bad as my mother was at the time. I was falling asleep on the train. There I am, an executive for a major company, and I'm falling asleep on the train because I'm drunk because I've been in the bar car, driving backwards on the highway, a lot of that kind of insanity around alcohol. And I realized, okay, so I went to AA, and it was with AA that I was able to really get my act together and see the severity of the disease in me, in the alcohol, and also connect it to how I was not dealing with my food issues. And, I'd been in therapy. I'd worked through a lot of my mother's stuff, but still I couldn't make that connection. And the connection happens really through the AA rooms and hearing that no matter what message. And I was able to really carry that over to the food, and that really helped me. So every time people say, go to an AA meeting, it's so important. It was so important for me. It was what really saved me. So I wound up getting much more serious about my abstinence and more willing to admit when I had a day one, more willing to be honest, more willing to really work the program as it's written. And it made a big difference. And I finally got abstinent and have had some time behind me now for the first time in a very long time. And, God has given me a path, and my relationship with my higher power has gotten much stronger over the last year. And I can thank the leaders of the last Grey Sheet meeting for doing that and bringing me the information that they did at a time when I really needed it. Not last November, but the one before that, I was diagnosed with lung cancer. And as a result of the diagnosis, I was devastated. I just thought, well, how am I going to do this? As it turned out, I went through not one, but 2 surgeries, one on my right and then one on my left lung to remove 2 tumors. I went through radiation. I went through chemotherapy. I am currently struggling with immunotherapy. My body's not too choked up about having to take it, even though it is supposed to be life-saving and life elongating. But my body's fighting it. Don't ask me why, but it is what it is. And I'm able to get through all this and have gotten through all this abstinently. I work with my sponsor. I do what I have to do. She tells me what to do when I can't eat, when I can't get the food down for whatever reasons. She helps me and we get through it. And she's been a godsend in my life, a gift. But more importantly is my relationship with my higher power. I have a very strong relationship right now. I pray on a daily basis, sometimes more than you need to know in terms of times during the course of the day. Today's one of those days. And I have a prayer partner, a person that I share my stuff with every day. She gives me a lot of guidance and direction, and she gives me a perspective, another perspective, so that I have someone else who can tell me their thoughts and maybe some other course I could take when Raina's mind wants to go in a particular direction, and revenge is the only answer. You know what I mean? I can go down that road, and I hate it when I do. And today was one of those days where I was going down that road and I didn't want to go there. And she really helped me to straighten myself out. And to going back to God, of course, did as well. So obviously it's my time, and I could ramble on for another 20, but I won't. I will just thank you all for listening. And again, I'm abstinent and grateful, and I don't mean no matter what. Thank you so much.